Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. Tonight, we have a story about two little girls, a cold and rainy night, a song that should never have been sung under those circumstances, and a truth buried for 30 years beneath silence and regret. So if you are somewhere warm right now, we are glad you are here. Turn the volume up just a little, because this one is going to reach all the way inside you. The moment nobody in that theater would ever forget began not with music. It began with the sound of a bottle striking a child in the chest. It hit little Ellie Mae Watson squarely in the center of her small frame, and the water inside burst outward across the ivory piano keys, across her sister's face, across the polished stage floor in a wide, cold arc. The man who threw it was already laughing before it landed, and the laughter spread through the theater the way fire moves through dry grass, quickly, completely, and without any concern for what it was burning. Ellie Mae did not cry out. She did not move. She sat completely still on the piano bench, with water dripping from her dark hair, her small hands still resting on the keys, her eyes fixed on some point far beyond the laughing faces in front of her. Beside her, her twin sister Nora had pressed her lips together so tightly they had gone pale, her whole body trembling, not from cold, though she was cold, but from the effort of holding herself together in front of 400 people who had already decided the two of them were nothing more than an evening's amusement. Ellie Mae's right hand moved, not toward the keys, but toward her chest. Beneath her thin, damp dress, on a cord worn close to her skin for 5 years, hung a small brass locket. She pressed 2 fingers against it through the cloth. It was what she always did when the world became too heavy, when she needed to remember she had not always been alone in it. She closed her eyes, and in a voice so small it vanished entirely beneath the noise around her, she whispered upward, to the only person she still spoke to when everything else ran out. "I'm sorry, Mama. I tried." To understand the true weight of those 4 words, you have to go back 5 years, to a January night so cold the city's breath fogged the street lamps, back to a woman named Dorothy Watson, to everyone who loved her, and nearly everyone who knew her loved her. Dorothy had grown up the daughter of a church organist in Georgia, inheriting her father's gift so completely that by 12, she was playing Sunday services herself. She moved north in her 20s, gave piano lessons in the mornings in her small East Side apartment, and sang at local venues in the evenings, churches, community halls, and the kind of honest jazz club that feels, on the right night, like the most real place in the world. Dorothy raised her twin daughters alone, with very little money and an abundance of everything money cannot purchase. She taught Ellie Mae to play piano almost before the child's hands were large enough to span the keys. She taught Nora to sing by singing alongside her every single night, their voices winding together in the warm dark of their apartment, filling the thin-walled rooms with something so alive that both girls grew up believing, without being told in so many words, that music was what kept the lights on. Not literally, but in every way that mattered more than literally. Every night before they slept, Dorothy would sit on the edge of their bed and hum the same lullaby, a simple, gentle melody she had written herself years before the girls were born, in a season of her life she rarely spoke about, a time when she had loved someone deeply, lost him, and found her way back through music. "This song means you are not alone," she would say softly. "It means I am here. It means no matter what happens, we are going to be all right." Then one January night, it found Dorothy and her girls 3 blocks from home with nothing but the coats on their backs. Dorothy spotted a collapsed awning against an old brick building and pushed both girls into the sheltered corner behind it. She unwrapped her own coat, bundled it around them both, pulled them against her body, and told them to close their eyes. "Think about warm things," she said. "Think about summer. Think about Sunday morning pancakes. Think about the lullaby." They fell asleep to the sound of her humming it softly against the howling dark. When the emergency workers found them the next morning, both girls were alive, wrapped completely in their mother's coat. Dorothy was beside them. She had given everything she had, her coat, her warmth, her life, and she had not asked for anything in return. Ellie Mae was 5 years old. Nora was 5 years old by 4 minutes. The system tried to help. There were caseworkers and relatives who were located and then, one by one, found to be unavailable. And in the shuffle of grief and bureaucracy, 2 small girls with their mother's eyes and her quiet dignity slipped through every space that was supposed to hold them. So, they learned to survive the way children with no other option always learned, practically, quietly, together. Ellie Mae became the decision-maker, the planner, the one who kept watch. Nora became the one who noticed beauty, late afternoon light through a warehouse window, the smell of bread from a bakery at closing time. They balanced each other the way twins sometimes do, each carrying what the other could not. They found, in their second year on the streets, an abandoned building 2 blocks from the river. On the ground floor stood a broken upright piano, 11 missing keys, 3 that stuck, wildly out of tune, yet somehow still capable of making music when someone who loved it sat down to play. Every night, in the cold and the dark of that forgotten building, Dorothy practiced her mother's music, and Nora stood beside her and sang. They filled the empty space every night with Dorothy Watson's lullaby, keeping her alive the only way still available to them. Around her neck, Ellie Mae wore the locket found in her mother's coat pocket the night Dorothy died. Inside, a small photograph, worn soft at the edges from years of handling. Dorothy Watson, maybe 25 years old, standing in sunlight, laughing at something outside the frame. Yellow dress, the whole world apparently good and in front of her. Ellie Mae had opened and closed that locket so many times. The hinge had grown loose, and the brass had worn smooth, where her fingers always held it. She opened it every morning, every night, and every time in between when the weight of the world pressed too hard. It was the locket she pressed against, through her wet dress, in the moment after the bottle hit her, and the laughter swelled, and 4 words rose to her lips like the very last thing she had. "I'm sorry, Mama. I tried." The Hargrove Theater stood at the center of downtown, its marquee bright against the dark November sky. Inside, 400 people sat in velvet seats, comfortable and well-dressed, speaking in the easy murmur of people who have always had enough. The theater's managing director, Gerald Ashton, spotted the girls almost immediately after they slipped through the service entrance. When he looked down at their soaking wet, thin faces on his clean marble floor, what crossed his expression was not anger. It was amusement. He listened to Ellie Mae's quiet request, 1 song, anything you want, just something to eat, then turned to the intermission crowd and made his announcement in the comfortable, laughing tone of a man utterly unconcerned with anyone else's circumstances. 2 little girls from the street, he said, were offering to perform for food. The crowd gave him exactly what he wanted. They laughed. Someone made a remark about trained animals. Another person produced a phone to record. Ashton, feeding on the room, turned it into a full production. He would let them sing, he announced grandly, and if they managed not to embarrass themselves, they would earn a piece of bread. The audience applauded. They thought it was the most amusing thing all evening. Ellie Mae took Nora's hand, held it for 1 moment, steady, firm. Then they walked toward the stage. The lights up there were overwhelmingly bright. The Steinway Concert Grand at the center of the stage was black and perfect, and so far from the broken warehouse piano they practiced on that Ellie Mae stopped when she saw it. She stood looking at it with an expression that lived somewhere between wonder and grief. She sat down. Nora stood beside her, trembling from somewhere deep. Ellie Mae chose her mother's lullaby. She pressed the first key. And the bottle came, and the laughter came, and Ellie Mae sat with water in her hair and her fingers pressed against the locket, and something giving way inside her chest, quietly, finally, after 5 years of holding, and she whispered the 4 words no child should ever have cause to say. "I'm sorry, Mama. I tried." Then a voice came from the back of the hall that stopped everything. Not raised, not theatrical, simply certain. The voice of a man who has not needed to raise it in a very long time. "Will someone please tell me what is happening here?" The laughter stopped. All of it. Instantly. James Hargrove walked down the center aisle, and the only sound was his footsteps. 63 years old, broad-shouldered, white-haired, wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who has walked into a room and understood immediately everything done in his absence. He owned this theater. His father had built it 60 years ago. In 40 years of ownership, he had never once felt ashamed of what was happening inside it. Until tonight. He climbed the stage steps. He looked at the water across the piano keys, at Nora's face, at Ellie Mae, at her stillness, her composure, the particular dignity of a child who has been through enough that she has simply decided to be decent regardless of what the world does to her. He took off his jacket and placed it gently over both their shoulders. Then he knelt on the stage floor until his eyes were level with theirs. "What are your names?" "Ellie Mae and Nora. She's my sister." "Will you tell me about your family?" And so Ellie Mae did, in the careful, matter-of-fact way she had developed over 5 years for speaking about things that hurt the most, as though she had long since used up all available tears and was now simply reporting facts. She told him everything. Their mother's name, her gift, the blizzard, the coat, the lullaby, what Dorothy had said about music reaching hearts when nothing else could, what she had asked them never to stop doing. When Ellie Mae said the name Dorothy Watson, the room around James seemed to shift. His hands pressed harder against his knee. A long breath moved through him. Because James Hargrove had known Dorothy Watson. He had been 26 when he first saw her perform at the small jazz club where he worked weekend security. He had fallen in love, the way you fall in love when you are young and entirely without defenses. Suddenly, completely, with every part of yourself open to it. They had been together 2 years. They had talked about a future with the serious hopefulness of people who had not yet learned how fragile those conversations are. Then his father intervened. A proud, self-made man who had built the theater from nothing, his father sat James down and told him plainly that Dorothy Watson was not the right choice, that James had responsibilities, that she did not fit within them. James had been young. He had not yet become the man he was going to spend the rest of his life becoming. He listened. He wrote Dorothy a careful, cowardly letter and handed it to his father to deliver, because he could not face her himself. He told himself she would be all right. He spent 30 years building a life on top of that thought, without ever fully reckoning with what was buried underneath. He did not know, until 3 weeks after the night at the theater, that his father had never delivered the letter. He found out when he finally went through his father's old files, something he had been avoiding for 15 years since his father's death, and that he now understood he had been avoiding because some part of him had always known he might find something he was not ready to face. The letter was in the 3rd drawer, sealed, unopened, exactly as James had left it 30 years ago. Beside it, in his father's precise handwriting on a single sheet of ivory paper, "Dorothy Watson came to the office. I informed her that you had reconsidered, that she was not what you needed. She did not argue. She thanked me, and she left." James sat in his father's chair for a very long time. Dorothy had come herself, brave enough for that, brave enough for anything, and had been turned away by a man who decided his son's future mattered more than her heart. She had walked out believing James had made his choice and sent his father because he could not face her. She had carried that wound silently, raised her daughters without ever speaking their father's name, and gone out into a January blizzard and given everything she had, and never once asked why. James pressed the letter to his chest and let 30 years of carefully managed grief come completely undone. But there was something else in that drawer. Behind the letter, in a small cardboard box, was a cassette tape. No label. He almost set it aside. Something made him reach for the old tape player still on the shelf and press it in. A moment of silence. Then piano music. Simple, gentle. A melody that sounded, the moment it began, as though he had always known it. Then Dorothy's voice. He had not heard her voice in 30 years. It moved through the room and through him the way her voice had always moved. Warm, certain, full of something that made the air feel more true. She was singing a lullaby. The same one Ellie Mae and Nora had been playing on a broken piano in an empty building for 5 years. She had recorded it here, in this office, at some point before everything fell apart. He did not know why. He only knew that he sat and listened all the way through without moving, and when it ended, he sat in the silence for a long time before he was able to stand. He brought the tape home. 3 days later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, he set the old tape player on the coffee table in front of the girls. "I found something," he said, "that I think belongs to you." He pressed play. The piano came first. Simple, gentle, immediately familiar. Nora went completely still. Ellie Mae's hand moved to the locket at her chest. Then Dorothy's voice filled the room. Nora made a sound that had no name. Not a word, not quite a sob, something that had never existed before that moment. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Ellie Mae did not make any sound at all. She sat with her fingers around the locket and her eyes closed, and her mother's voice moving through the room around her, and the tears came down her face in 2 straight, quiet lines, the way she had always cried. Privately, without drama, as though even grief was something she had learned to carry without burdening anyone. The lullaby played all the way through. When it ended, the room was very quiet. After a long time, Ellie Mae opened her eyes and looked at James. "She sounds like Sunday morning," she said. "She always sounded like Sunday morning." James nodded. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Yes," he said. "She did." But none of that had happened yet on the night James knelt on the stage and looked at his daughters for the first time. He stood up. He turned to face the audience. The theater was so silent that the rain against the high windows was clearly audible. Soft, steady, patient, as though the night itself had leaned in to hear what came next. "These girls are my daughters." Nobody moved. Their mother was Dorothy Watson. She was the finest person I have ever known, and she deserved better than what this world gave her, better than what I gave her. His voice thinned on that last sentence. He allowed it. He did not reach for composure. "My daughters are going to sing tonight, not for bread, not for anyone's entertainment. They are going to sing because their mother asked them to keep singing, because she was right that music reaches hearts when nothing else can, and because these 2 girls have honored that request for 5 years, in circumstances none of us sitting in these seats have ever had to face. They have more than earned the right to be heard, and I am more grateful than I know how to say that they are still here to be heard at all." He turned back to Ellie Mae. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at his face, at what a person carries in their expression when they are not performing for anyone, when they are simply, completely present in their own grief and love. She placed her small, cold hand in his. Then she turned to the piano. She pressed her palms flat against the keys for just a moment, feeling them. Her right hand came up and touched the locket briefly. Then she began to play. Dorothy Watson's lullaby moved through the Hargrove Theater the way first light moves into a room that has been dark for a very long time. Slowly, then all at once, until there was nothing else. It was a simple melody. It had always been simple. Dorothy had not written it to impress anyone. She had written it to say something that plain words were not large enough to carry. Something about love and permanence, and the kind of hope that does not depend on circumstances to survive. The lullaby carried all of that inside it, and played on that stage by a 10-year-old girl who had learned it on a broken piano in the cold. It released everything into the air of that theater and let it land wherever it needed to land. When Nora opened her mouth and sang, the sound that came out was not a child's voice. It was grief given a melody. It was love that had survived 5 winters without shelter. It was the sound of something absolutely true, and the 400 people in that hall felt it move past every defense they had ever built and settle in the parts of themselves they kept most carefully protected. The man who had thrown the bottle sat with both hands pressed over his face, shoulders shaking. The woman in the fur-trimmed coat was crying openly, past any concern for how she looked. In the wings, members of the orchestra were holding each other. When the final note dissolved into the warm silence of the theater, nothing moved. 5 full seconds. Then every single person in that building rose to their feet. All 400. At once. The applause that came with them was not measured or appreciative. It was involuntary, enormous, the sound of 400 people responding to something real, with the only expression available to them, finding it completely inadequate and giving it everything they had anyway. James Hargrove stood on that stage with his arms around his daughters, eyes closed, tears moving freely down his face. He held them the way a man holds something returned to him after he gave up all right to hope for its return, completely, carefully, as though he is both terrified it might disappear and absolutely certain he will never let it go again. Ellie Mae's arms came slowly up and held on. Nora pressed her face against his side, and, after 5 years of holding herself together in the cold, she simply did not anymore. She let go of all of it. Every hard night, every empty building, every morning she had chosen one more time to keep going, and she cried the way children cry when they finally feel safe enough to. Completely, without reservation, with the pure relief of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has finally been allowed to set it down. That same night, James took them home, to the house that had been too quiet for too long. He made them soup and sat with them in the warm kitchen light, learning their faces, memorizing the small details he would spend the rest of his life being grateful he had not missed. He made up 2 beds in the room that had always been a guest room, and that now, as he smoothed down the covers, he understood had always been waiting. Before they slept, Ellie Mae unclasped the locket and held it in her open palm. Dorothy Watson, 25 years old, laughing in a yellow dress, the whole world apparently good and ahead of her. Ellie Mae looked at the photograph for a long moment, then set the locket gently on the table beside the bed. From across the room, in the dark, Nora's voice came softly. "Do you think she knew?" Ellie Mae was quiet for a moment. "I think she knew everything," she said. "I think she always did." A silence. Then, even more softly, "I think she sent us there tonight." Ellie Mae did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was the quietest it had been all evening, and somehow the fullest. "I know she did," she said. Long after both girls were asleep, James Hargrove sat in the hallway outside their door with his back against the wall and his eyes closed, listening to the sound of his daughter's breathing, learning it, memorizing it. sitting with the grief of all the nights he had not known to listen for it, and the gratitude, enormous, undeserved, overwhelming, that tonight he was here to hear it at all. In the years that followed, Ellie Mae and Nora Watson Hargrove grew into musicians of a kind that comes along very rarely. They performed across the country and eventually the world. They founded the Dorothy Watson Foundation, bringing music and instruments to homeless children everywhere, because they understood what music means to a child who has nothing else. Not entertainment, not ambition, a lifeline, a reason to keep going, a way of pressing two fingers against a locket in the dark and remembering that love does not end when the person at the center of it is gone. It changes form. It finds new ways through the world. It lives in the ways we choose to carry it forward. And every performance, without exception, in every city, on every stage, ended the same way, with the lullaby. And in every recording, if you listened carefully after the final note and before the applause fully rose, you could hear one small, quiet sound. Ellie Mae's fingers finding the locket. Every time. Without fail. Because some things are worth holding on to. Because music is not about perfection, and love is not about deserving, and the people we lose are never entirely gone as long as we carry what they gave us. A small brass locket on a thin cord. A letter never delivered. A voice on an old cassette tape. A lullaby learned on a broken piano in the cold. Sometimes the things that hold us together are very small. And sometimes one song, in the right room, at the right moment, is enough to bring everything home. If something opened in you tonight, if this story reminded you that love finds its way back, that the people we lose are never entirely gone, that one act of real kindness can change the entire direction of a life, then you are exactly who Beyond the Badge was made for. Please subscribe right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you. Was it the locket, the letter, the tape, the lullaby? We read every single comment. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who needs to be reminded tonight that goodness is still real, please share this with them. That one small act might reach further than you will ever know. Until next time, hold your people close. Tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait. This has been Beyond the Badge. God bless you. We will see you next time.